Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? The morning began with a faint aroma of toast that had ventured a second too long under the grill, Tommy's particular method of culinary contribution. The clock on the mantel ticked with a self-satisfied air, and the sunlight coming through the tall windows of South Audley Mansions did its best to convince the room it was respectable. Tuppence Beresford, however, had learned that a well-behaved morning was usually the prelude to mischief. "Posts here," she announced, scooping up the neat stack from the hall table. 3 bills, 1 advertisement for a new vacuum cleaner, and, oh, she frowned, this one's different. Tommy, who was attempting to butter a slice without scattering crumbs over the crossword, looked up. Different how? Perfumed, perhaps? The admirers never rest. "It hasn't got a name," said Tuppence, turning the envelope over. "No address, no return. Just the Beresfords in careful block letters. The handwriting looks official, but look at the paper." Tommy wiped his fingers and took it. Heavy stock, very Whitehall. He held it to the light. "Watermark, Ministry of Defence. My dear girl, we appear to have made friends in high places again." "That or enemies," Tuppence murmured. She slit it open with the butter knife and unfolded a single sheet. The message was typed, short and menacingly polite. "A name once honoured will be blackened by truth unless the missing papers are returned. No further warning will be given, no signature, no hint of who it meant." For a moment, the domestic sounds, the tick of the clock, the faint hiss of the kettle, seemed to step back, leaving only that single line hanging in the air. Tommy cleared his throat. "Well, that's delightfully cryptic. Which name, do you suppose, and what missing papers?" Tuppence read it again, lips pressed tight. "If this is someone's idea of a prank, it's a particularly dull one. But ministry paper, Tommy, they don't sell it at the corner shop." He tried for lightness. "Perhaps we're being invited to a treasure hunt. Return the missing papers, save the family honour." She gave him a look that could have withered an oak. "Treasure hunts don't threaten blackened names." Tommy leaned back. "Then let's apply logic. Who's most likely to wish our good name ill?" Tuppence ticked off possibilities. "The bank for that overdraft in 47, your tailor for creative interpretation of credit, and possibly Mrs. Simmons downstairs after your gramophone recital of Tipperary at midnight." "I deny the final charge," said Tommy serenely. "It was only 11:30. But she wasn't smiling. Her finger traced the watermark again. "This isn't personal mischief. It smells of offices and dust and locked cabinets." He saw the familiar spark kindle in her eyes. The one that meant adventure, or at least interference, was inevitable. "My love," he said warningly, "we promised each other a quiet autumn. Gardening, bridge, and no international conspiracies." Tuppence folded the letter and slid it back into its envelope with exquisite care. "I'm not suggesting international, merely mildly governmental." Before Tommy could protest, the telephone on the desk shrilled. They exchanged a glance. The timing was too perfect. Tuppence answered. "Beresford's residence, yes? Oh, Major Greville, how unexpected." She listened, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to sharpened attention. "Missing file? From which department? I see. Yes, we did receive something rather odd. No, unsigned. Very well, we'll be here." She replaced the receiver slowly. That was Greville from Whitehall. A classified file disappeared 3 nights ago. He wouldn't say what was in it, only that its absence is causing serious discomfort. And, Tommy, he said one of the copies was once handled by us, during the war. Tommy whistled. "Handled by us? That narrows it to, dozens of incidents." He mentioned Operation Dovecote. The name struck like a match in a dark corridor. Tommy sat up straight. "Dovecote? That ridiculous bird code nonsense? I thought it was declassified ages ago." "So did I." She stared at the envelope. "Apparently someone doesn't agree." He rose and paced to the window. Outside, London moved with its usual calm indifference, buses groaning, a milk cart clinking away. Yet the world inside the flat had tilted an inch. Let's suppose, he said thoughtfully, that some relic of Dovecote has flown the coop. Someone wants it back quietly before the truth, whatever that is, comes out, and they think we have it. Tuppence perched on the arm of the sofa. Do we? Not unless Albert's been keeping classified material under the teapot, which, granted, is possible. Right on cue, Albert entered with a tray of coffee, his expression a blend of curiosity and pride. Morning, sir, ma'am. You look like you've just read your obituaries. Tuppence gestured at the envelope. Albert, did anyone unusual deliver the post today? He shook his head. Same lad as usual, though he did have a bruise on his chin, looked like he'd been in a scuffle. Thank you, Albert, said Tommy. You may withdraw before Mrs. Beresford recruits you for espionage. Albert lingered. Beg pardon, sir, but if it is espionage, I can fetch my notebook from 42. Still got all the codes from the Home Guard. Out, said Tuppence sweetly, and he retreated grinning. Tommy poured coffee. I suppose we should hand this over to Greville. And miss all the fun? She sipped thoughtfully. No, Tommy. Something about this feels off. That wording, a name once honoured, it's not about the papers. It's about reputation. Ours. He frowned. Someone's trying to smear us. Or someone close to us. The Beresford name isn't exactly obscure in certain circles. Tommy regarded her over his cup. Tuppence, you realise this is how all our peaceful retirements end. First curiosity, then catastrophe. Yes, but at least it's interesting. She stood decisive. We'll ring Greville back. Tell him we're curious civilians willing to assist. He groaned. You mean interfere? All right, but let's tread lightly. If it's government business, we can't exactly storm Whitehall demanding explanations. No, she said, but we can invite explanations to come to us. That afternoon they strolled through Green Park, outwardly ordinary, inwardly alert. The letter remained in Tuppence's handbag, a small, silent weight. They spoke idly of pigeons and flower beds until she said, Do you remember how Dovecote ended? The agent who never came back? Garland, Tommy replied. Codename Whistler. Vanished during a handoff in Lisbon. The file must have included his reports. And if they've gone missing again, someone wants to bury what's in them. Or dig it up, said Tommy. Either way, we're the unlucky gardeners. They turned back toward Piccadilly. The city looked untroubled. Buses lumbered. A street organ played a cheerful tune. Yet Tuppence felt the prickle of eyes on her back. She glanced around. Nothing but an old man feeding birds. Still the feeling clung. When they reached home, a small detail made her pause. The letter, which she'd left on the sideboard, was gone. In its place lay a clean sheet of the same ministry stationery, blank but for a single embossed watermark. No footprints, no forced entry. Tommy stared. Either Albert's become pathologically tidy, or we've had a visitor. Tuppence touched the paper. It's colder than the room. Whoever came was quick. He exhaled slowly. All right, partner, I concede this is no prank. Her voice was soft but sure. Then we find out what they want before they decide to blacken anything at all. She slipped the new blank page into the envelope beside the letter's warning. The juxtaposition, words and silence, looked oddly deliberate, like a challenge. Tommy reached for his coat. Shall we pay Major Greville a social call? He did say, serious discomfort. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. Precisely. And I, for one, refuse to let anyone make us uncomfortable in our own name. They left the flat together, door closing behind them with the decisive click of two people who knew perfectly well they were stepping back into trouble, and did it anyway, hand in hand. Smile, my sweet, Tommy murmured as they approached the wrought-iron gates of the Belgian embassy. You look as though you're about to interrogate the Foreign Office. I might, said Tuppence. If one more person mentions that dreadful incident with the cucumber sandwiches, I'll consider it espionage. The April sunlight gilded the embassy's marble facade, where bunting fluttered politely, and a brass quartet attempted Rule Britannia in the key of hesitation. Inside, the grand salon gleamed, crystal, lilies, silver trays, and the air was thick with talk, that curious blend of charity, ambition, and cake. Tuppence accepted a cup of tea from a footman whose shoes could have been used as mirrors. Around her, Voices rose and fell in cultured murmurs, the sound of people exchanging information under the polite pretense of ignorance. Tommy, in a suit that had seen both diplomacy and danger, leaned close. "I still don't see how drinking lukewarm tea helps solve mysterious letters." "Patience," said Tuppence. "You can tell more about a secret by where it's gossiped than where it's filed." Across the room, two men in morning coats stood half-hidden behind a tall urn of tulips, their heads bent together. One, narrow-shouldered with a diplomat's careful posture, said in a low tone, "Utter scandal, of course, but hush, old man. Apparently the Beresfords were mixed up in Dovecote." Tuppence's hand froze on her saucer. "Impossible," murmured the second. "I thought that business was buried." "Not quite buried enough. There's talk in the corridors, files gone, names re-examined. Someone wants to clean house." The rest was lost under a polite burst of applause as a dowager knocked over a sugar bowl. Tuppence turned, face composed. "Tommy," she said lightly, "do fetch me another eclair, would you? 2, if you must." He raised a brow but obeyed, moving off toward the buffet. When he returned, she was examining the tulip display with the mild air of a woman wondering if it matched her curtains. "Well?" he asked. "They were discussing us," she said under her breath. "Dovecote again." His easy expression faltered. "You're certain?" "Word for word. Beresford scandal. Apparently our little letter is gossip column material in diplomatic circles." Before he could reply, a hearty voice cut through the chatter. "Good heavens, Tommy Beresford, haven't seen you since Berlin." Colonel Bryce emerged from the crowd, tall, genial, with the tan of a man more used to Africa than Mayfair. His handshake was firm enough to suggest ownership. "Colonel Bryce," said Tommy smoothly, "still terrorizing foreign attachés?" "Only the deserving ones," Bryce said, "and Mrs. Beresford, still the most dangerous woman in London." "Only when provoked," Tuppence said sweetly. Bryce laughed and drew them toward a quieter alcove beneath an oil painting of some Belgian ancestor. "I hear you've been receiving interesting correspondence." Tuppence's smile didn't waver. "How well informed you are," he shrugged. "Old colleagues talk. A warning, if I may. Sometimes it's best to leave sleeping lions be." Tommy met his eyes. "And if the lions have already woken?" Bryce's tone cooled. "Then I'd suggest running faster than the others in the room." He plucked a sandwich from a passing tray. "Dovecote was a nasty piece of work. Best forgotten." "We weren't aware it was remembered," said Tuppence, "or that anyone thought we'd misbehaved." "Not misbehaved," said Bryce softly. "Just inconvenient. You ask too many questions." Tuppence tilted her head. "Curiosity built the empire, Colonel." "And dismantled more than one career." He nodded pleasantly. "Enjoy the tea." When he'd moved away, Tommy exhaled. "Well, that's ominous enough for a telegram." "Did you see his cufflink?" said Tuppence. "Small crest, gold lion rampant. Foreign Office issue. Yet he's meant to be retired. Why still wear the livery unless he wants to remind everyone he's inside the circle?" Tommy studied her fondly. "I do wish you'd been less observant during the war. We might now be farming turnips in Sussex." "And bored stiff," she retorted. "No, Tommy, something's afoot. The letter, the talk, Bryce's warning, they're threads of the same tapestry." They strolled back into the main room, their expressions the perfect blend of social brightness and internal alarm. Lady Moncrief cornered Tuppence for a 10-minute monologue on the moral decline of society, during which Tuppence nodded, smiled, and secretly reconstructed every syllable of the whispered conversation. When at last they escaped, Tommy handed her a glass of punch. "What's the verdict, partner?" "That we are suddenly far more interesting than we were yesterday morning." She lowered her voice. "Those diplomats weren't gossiping idly. One of them mentioned files gone, plural. And that phrase, clean house, it sounds like someone's revisiting the past." He frowned. "Or rewriting it." The band struck up a hesitant waltz, and couples drifted toward the parquet floor. A waiter brushed past carrying a tray of letters addressed in gilt envelopes, donation receipts for the charity auction. One slipped, landing face up near Tuppence's shoe. She stooped to pick it up, and froze. The embossed heading read Ministry of Defence, and the paper was the same heavy stock as their anonymous letter. In one corner, faintly penciled, was a single word, Dovecote. She replaced it before anyone noticed, her pulse quickening. "Tommy," she whispered, They're still using the same stationery. Someone here, today, is linked to that letter. His eyes scanned the room, weighing faces behind polite laughter. Too many suspects, not enough motives. Then we start narrowing both, said Tuppence, beginning with Colonel Bryce. Bryce was across the room, deep in conversation with the ambassador's secretary. The light caught his cufflink again, a golden lion winking under the chandelier. He turned slightly, as though sensing their scrutiny, and raised his glass in a gesture that could have been toast or warning. "Let's go," said Tommy quietly, "before our curiosity becomes a headline." They made their excuses, enduring farewells scented with cologne and diplomacy. Outside, the late afternoon city hummed. A paperboy shouted headlines about a shipping strike. Taxis honked like impatient brass. Tuppence breathed in the cooler air. "Do you know, Tommy, there's something peculiarly sinister about respectable events. Everyone pretending the world's perfectly in order while it quietly isn't." He smiled ruefully. "We used to call that civilization." They walked toward Hyde Park Corner, the embassy receding behind them like a theatre after curtain. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then Tommy said, "We've been warned off twice in 24 hours. That suggests we're dangerously close to something." "Or someone wants us to think so," she replied. "Either way, it's personal now." They paused at a crossing. The traffic light turned red, bathing them in colour like a sudden stage cue. Tuppence looked up at him. "Do you believe we're being watched?" "I believe," said Tommy, scanning the reflection in a shop window, "that the gentleman in the bowler hat has stopped every time we have since Knightsbridge." She didn't turn. "How comforting. At least we're popular." The light changed. They crossed, quickening pace. Behind them, the bowler-hatted man hesitated, then vanished into the crowd. Only when they reached their building did Tuppence allow herself a small, tight laugh. "You see, Tommy? One afternoon of tea, gossip, and thin sandwiches, and already we've acquired a secret admirer." He opened the door for her with mock gallantry. "Let's hope he sends flowers rather than funerals." The hall clock chimed 6 as they entered their flat. The sound felt heavier than usual, echoing against unseen thoughts. On the sideboard, the envelope from that morning still lay where Tuppence had left it, its flap neatly sealed once more. Tommy stared. "Did you—" "No," she said softly. "I didn't touch it." A faint scent of lilies, embassy lilies, lingered in the air. The teacup rattled faintly against its saucer. Tuppence wasn't shaking, but the past sometimes had that effect. It trembled through china. On the table lay a scatter of old papers, yellowed memos, coded notes, a few faded photographs. The Beresford sitting room, usually the picture of cheerful domesticity, looked like a small intelligence archive after an enthusiastic hurricane. Tommy stood by the mantel, sleeves rolled up, a pencil behind one ear. "If anyone ever asks what we do for fun," he said, "let's never admit to sorting through 10-year-old government secrets." "Don't be flippant," said Tuppence. "These are records of Operation Dovecote." She tapped a folder marked Confidential, 1943. "You remember? Messy business with that communications ring in Lisbon." "I remember the code name being ridiculous," said Tommy. "Doves indeed, pigeons with passports." She ignored him. "We handled logistics, code names, drop points. Then there was Garland, Agent Whistler, who vanished. His death was never confirmed." "And now," Tommy mused, "files vanish again. History repeats itself like a bad gramophone record." Albert entered, balancing a tray of sandwiches that had suffered in the line of duty. "Found this in the trunk, Mrs. B. Thought it might jog something." He handed her a dog-eared photograph. It showed a group around a tea table in wartime drab. The central figure, Garland, laughed toward the camera. Beside him, half hidden by a raised teacup, another face, blurred and maddeningly obscure. Tuppence narrowed her eyes. "That's the Lisbon meeting. But who's this person with the cup?" Albert squinted. "Could be a lady, or a very tidy gentleman." "Useless observation," murmured Tommy. "Still, the shadow on that wall, see? Someone else was standing just outside the frame." Tuppence traced the outline. "That's what bothers me. I feel I know that profile." Tommy leaned closer. "You always do this, my dear. You remember people by hats, dogs, and half a chin." "And usually correctly," she replied. "Albert, fetch the magnifying glass." When he'd gone, she said quietly, "If Garland was betrayed, whoever hid behind that cup might be the one responsible." Tommy frowned. "You think this whole blackmail threat links back to Dovecote, to Garland's disappearance?" "I'm sure of it," her voice softened. "He trusted us. If his death was covered up, maybe the missing file holds the truth." Albert returned with the glass and a hopeful expression. "I cleaned the lens with my tie." "Admirable devotion," said Tommy. "One day it'll kill you." Tuppence bent over the photograph. The image yielded nothing new, only the faint glint of a brooch or tie-pin, shaped like a tiny bird in flight. "Dove," she whispered, "or something pretending to be one." She laid the picture down carefully. "We need more than guesses. Tommy, see if your contact at the ministry, what's his name, the nervous one with the eyebrows, still owes you a favour." "Harding," said Tommy. "He always looks as if he's apologising for his existence. Excellent man for secrets." He shrugged into his coat. "You'll stay here?" "Of course not. I'll stay here for now," she said. "But if you're not back in 2 hours, I shall assume you've been kidnapped and begin negotiations." He grinned. "They'd pay you to take me back." When the door closed behind him, the flat felt oddly hollow. The clock ticked too loudly. Tuppence gathered the papers into a neat pile and tied them with ribbon. As she did, the telephone gave a short, clipped ring, one ring only, then silence. She lifted the receiver. Nothing. Just the faintest hiss, as if someone were listening but not speaking. "Who is it?" she asked softly. The line clicked dead. Tuppence replaced the receiver slowly. "So, we're being watched as well as warned. Lovely." Meanwhile, Tommy strode briskly through St. James's, the rhythm of his shoes matching the march of his thoughts. The city was politely busy, clerks in bowler hats, errand boys on bicycles, the faint smell of petrol and afternoon rain. He reached Harding's office near Whitehall, a warren of corridors smelling faintly of ink and resignation. Harding, thin and twitchy, rose from his desk like a startled heron. "Tommy Beresford, I thought you'd gone into retirement. Gardening or philosophy?" "Neither proved restful," said Tommy. "I need to ask about a certain missing file." Harding's fingers fidgeted with a paperclip. "Ah, everyone's asking. Very hush-hush. Not the sort of thing I should discuss." "But you will," said Tommy pleasantly, "because you're patriotic, and because I once saved your career by not mentioning the business with the typist in Cairo." Harding winced. "That again." He lowered his voice. "All right, one hint. The file disappeared from secure storage 3 nights ago. The sign-out ledger shows your name." Tommy stared. "My name?" "Forged, of course, but convincing. Someone wanted it to look as though you took it." Tommy absorbed that. "Why me?" Harding spread his hands helplessly. "Because you're convenient. Ex-operative, public-spirited, slightly too curious. If you were to fall under suspicion, the real thief might slip away." "And who might that be?" Harding hesitated. "I'd keep an eye on Colonel Bryce. He's been prowling." Tommy thanked him and left, mind whirring. The pavement outside glistened faintly, though the rain had stopped. Traffic hissed, umbrellas tilted. As he turned toward Piccadilly, he became aware of a rhythm not his own, the echo of another pair of footsteps behind him. He quickened his pace. So did they. He turned into a side street lined with lamp-posts and shop-fronts shuttered for the afternoon. Reflected in a window, he saw a man, grey hat pulled low, coat collar up, face indistinct. When Tommy paused to look in a display of cufflinks, the man paused too, pretending to study cigars. Tommy smiled faintly. "Watching the watchers, are we?" He resumed walking, veering suddenly into a narrow mews. When he turned again, the street was empty except for a cat cleaning itself beside a milk crate. The follower had melted away. "Efficient fellow," murmured Tommy, "almost as good as I used to be." He glanced down and noticed something lying near the curb, a small scrap of paper. He picked it up. It was a torn fragment of official stationery, the watermark visible in the dull light. On it, written in pencil, were 2 words, Operation Dovecote. He folded it into his pocket. Back at the flat, Tuppence was writing a list titled People Who Might Ruin Our Lives. Under it she'd neatly numbered Colonel Bryce, whoever forged Tommy's name. The person behind the teacup, possibly Albert if sandwiches remain inedible. Albert knocked and entered, looking indignant. "Mrs. B, there's a man downstairs asking for you. Said his name was, he frowned, Gray. Just Gray? Yes, ma'am. Polite sort. Didn't give a card. Tell him I'm not receiving, she said quickly. And Albert, lock the door after he goes. By the time Tommy returned, she had the photograph spread out again. Well, she demanded. He recounted Harding's story. When he reached the part about his name on the ledger, her expression hardened. They're not just threatening us, they're framing you. Seems so, and our friend in the grey hat decided to accompany me home. Grey hat, she repeated thoughtfully. Albert said a man named Gray came calling. A coincidence? Or a confession, said Tommy grimly. They exchanged a glance, the kind that belonged to their war years, the one that meant same battle, same side. Tuppence touched the photograph once more. Whoever hides behind this cup started Dovecote's secrets, and now they're stirring them again. Tommy poured 2 stiff whiskies. Then we'd better be ready for the second act, she raised her glass, to shadows and to dragging them into daylight. The clink rang sharp and clear, the single bright sound in a room heavy with ghosts. Did you notice the removal van? Tuppence asked, peering through the lace curtain. Number 9's finally got a tenant, and she's arriving with more luggage than a minor royal. Tommy, halfway through buttering toast, didn't look up. So long as she doesn't play the trombone or keep parrots, I'm in favour of civilization expanding. She's elegant, said Tuppence thoughtfully, but she moves like someone who's learnt to watch windows before entering rooms. Tommy grinned. You mean like you? Precisely. Outside, the new tenant supervised a pair of porters unloading trunks. A tall, graceful woman in mourning black, hat veil drawn low, gloves precise. She thanked no one, merely nodded. Even at that distance, something about her carriage whispered self-control taught by necessity. That afternoon, a polite card appeared on their doormat. Mrs. Vane, number 9, tea at 4, if convenient. Tuppence held it between 2 fingers. Well, that's efficient. She hasn't even unpacked her teaspoons. Tommy eyed the card. Widow's handwriting, firm, economical, no loops, no flourishes, she's not in mourning, she's hiding behind it. Then we'd better accept. One never knows when one's neighbour might be a blackmailer, a spy, or merely in need of sugar. At 4 precisely, they knocked. The door opened before the echo faded. Mrs. Vane herself stood there, tall, pale, with hair the shade of tarnished silver, eyes too cool for grief. The flat smelled faintly of lavender and metal polish. How delightful, she said. I've heard so much about you both. Indeed, said Tuppence, smiling. We hadn't realised we were news. Oh, one always hears of the celebrated Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. Your work during the war was fascinating. Tommy felt the smallest jolt. That's ancient history, Mrs. Vane. These days we're devoted to indoor gardening. She led them to a sitting room already perfect. Curtains drawn just so, silver tray laid with tea, not a speck out of place. Yet every polished surface seemed to watch them. Tuppence accepted a cup. You've settled quickly. I dislike transition, said Mrs. Vane. It wastes time. One should always act as though one belongs. There was an odd silence while spoons chimed delicately against porcelain. So, said Tuppence brightly, you've come from abroad. A little while in Geneva, Mrs. Vane replied. Before that, Portugal. The word dropped like a pebble into still water. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged the briefest glance. Lisbon, Operation Dovecote, Garland. Lovely climate, said Tuppence, keeping her voice light. Variable, Mrs. Vane said, particularly in 43. Tommy set down his cup a touch too firmly. You were there during the war. Everyone was somewhere, weren't they? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You two under the names... Oh, what were they? Mr. and Mrs. Meadows, wasn't it? Tuppence's spine went rigid. That code name hadn't appeared in any public record. How clever of you to remember, she said slowly. I'd almost forgotten it myself. Oh, I never forget things, Mrs. Vane said softly. Names, faces, debts, they stay with me. They lingered only a polite half-hour. When they returned upstairs, Tuppence shut the door and leaned against it. Well, Tommy exhaled. She's either psychic or she's read files that were supposed to be buried. And that means she's connected to Dovecote, said Tuppence. Portugal wasn't coincidence. Could she be warning us? Or testing us, she murmured. We gave nothing away. Not unless blinking counts. That evening, Albert brought in the post and a puzzled expression. "There's something in the letterbox, sir. Not a letter. Just this." He held out a small matchbox. Foreign. Cheap. The label showed a white bird outlined in gold. Tuppence took it carefully. "That symbol?" "Used in Dovecote transmissions," Tommy finished. "Whistler's marker. We'd leave one at the drop once a message was collected." The box was empty. "A message," she murmured. "Delivered and taken." Albert frowned. "Shall I toss it out?" "Not yet," said Tommy. "We don't throw away ghosts before we've identified them." When Albert withdrew, Tuppence opened the box under the lamp. Inside, under the false bottom, a sliver of folded paper. "Well," she breathed, "someone's efficient." The scrap bore only 2 words in neat capitals: "Look down." They did, and saw, faintly traced on the brass rim of the box, an engraving. No. 9. Tommy gave a low whistle. "Our charming neighbour leaves calling cards in code." Tuppence sat back, eyes narrowing. "Either she's inviting conversation or issuing a warning, and I dislike both without tea." The next morning, Mrs. Vane passed them on the stairs. She carried a parcel wrapped in brown paper and gave them a smile that would have frozen brandy. "Out early," Tuppence observed. "I dislike idleness," Mrs. Vane replied. "One sees too much of it in retirement." "Quite," said Tommy. "You were in Portugal long?" She paused mid-step. "Long enough to learn that not every ally is a friend." Then she descended, heels tapping like a metronome of secrets. When she was gone, Tuppence whispered, "She's either baiting us, or she's afraid." Tommy nodded. And fear can be contagious. That evening, unable to resist, they invited Mrs. Vane for tea in return. She accepted with the grace of a duchess inspecting inferiors. As the kettle hissed, Tuppence studied her guest. No ring on the gloved hand, though the obituary in the hall register listed Captain Edward Vane, deceased. Her black attire was expensive, but her shoes were worn at the heel, not mourning clothes bought for grief, but kept for disguise. "So lonely being widowed," Tuppence ventured. Mrs. Vane looked straight at her. Not if one's husband was the kind better remembered than revisited. Tommy coughed. "We were sorry to hear. Was he military?" "Naval intelligence," she said. "Died in service. They said it was pneumonia. It wasn't." There was nothing theatrical in her tone, just calm finality. Tuppence, for once, was silent. After tea, Mrs. Vane rose smoothly. "You're kind. Most people find the past tedious." "On the contrary," said Tuppence, "we specialise in the past when it refuses to stay put." Mrs. Vane paused at the door. "Then you may soon be very busy indeed." When the latch clicked shut, Tommy muttered, "And that, my dear, was either a prophecy or a threat." "Possibly both," Tuppence said. "But she's frightened, Tommy. Under that poise, you can see it in her hands. She hides it better than most agents I've known." Later, as dusk settled, Tuppence sat writing notes. Every move she's made connects back to Dovecote, Portugal, Whistler, and that matchbox. Tommy paced. Yet she could still be innocent. Suppose she found something, her husband's papers perhaps, and is warning us because she fears what's inside. Then why all the theatre? He shrugged. Maybe she doesn't know who to trust. They both started at a faint sound, footsteps in the corridor. Then a slip of paper slid under their door. Tuppence crossed the room and picked it up, the same tidy handwriting. "I know who forged your name." She stared at it a long moment. "Tommy, she's pulling us deeper, one breadcrumb at a time." "And we're following," he admitted. "As usual." She smiled faintly. "We always did have terrible self-control." Outside, somewhere beyond the half-drawn curtains, a door shut quietly. Mrs. Vane's flat, number 9. The Beresfords looked at each other, and in the silence between them lived both curiosity and danger, the familiar twin spirits of their marriage. Tommy had always maintained that the Ministry of Defence was less a building than a labyrinth designed to punish curiosity. He'd been there 3 times in his life, twice on business, once to find the lavatory, and each visit had confirmed his suspicion that bureaucracy was a more effective form of espionage than any foreign agent. Now, 10 years after Dovecote, He stood once again at the marble entrance beneath a clock that never seemed to tell the right time. "Good morning," said the guard, squinting at his pass. "Purpose of visit?" "Research," said Tommy. "Family history. Nothing dangerous, unless you count my great-aunt's views on socialism." The guard looked unconvinced but waved him through. The ministry archives occupied a basement corridor that smelled of dust and resignation. The air was cool and still. Even footsteps seemed to hesitate before echoing. Tommy paused at the door marked restricted access and produced a letter he'd carefully forged himself, not to deceive, but to impress. An archivist never opens a door for a man without paperwork. Inside, a junior clerk with thinning hair and spectacles like round coins looked up from his desk. "Can I assist you, sir?" "I hope so," said Tommy pleasantly. "I'm trying to trace documentation related to Operation Dovecote. I was involved at the time, purely peripherally, of course." The clerk went pale. "That's a closed file, sir. You'll need authorization." Tommy smiled as though authorization were a dear friend he'd left waiting outside. "Naturally. Major Greville referred me to you, said you'd be able to confirm the sign-out records." The clerk hesitated, torn between fear of regulation and fear of someone named Major Greville. The latter won. "Very good, sir. One moment." He vanished among the stacks, the shuffle of paper and the soft creak of drawers echoing like distant footsteps in a crypt. Tommy took in the surroundings, rows of grey filing cabinets, each labelled with a code more cryptic than the secrets they contained. Dust motes hung in the slanted light from the high window. After 10 minutes, the clerk returned, holding a ledger as though it might explode. "Here we are, sir. The Dovecote file. It was removed 4 nights ago." Tommy felt the faintest prickle at the base of his neck. "Removed? By whom?" The clerk licked his lips. "According to the log, by you, sir." "By me?" Tommy repeated too softly. "Yes. Signed in the name of Thomas Beresford. Date, time, clearance code, all appear in order." He turned the ledger around. There it was, T. Beresford in his own looping script. Tommy stared. It was his handwriting down to the flourish of the B. Someone had copied it perfectly. "I didn't sign that," he said. The clerk wrung his hands. "I thought not, sir. It was too perfect." "Too perfect?" An ordinary forgery always has hesitation, pauses, pressure marks. This one has none. It's as if whoever wrote it had practiced for years. The words hung between them like a thin layer of frost. "Who else has seen this?" Tommy asked. "No one, sir, but if an internal audit is ordered—" "They'll think I took it," Tommy finished grimly. "That's the idea." He glanced at the page again. Beneath the forged signature was a reference number, followed by the initials E.V. Who initialed that? The clerk bent over the ledger. "Ernest Vickers, sir. Retired last month. His replacement's not yet cleared." "Convenient timing," Tommy murmured. "May I borrow this for a moment?" "Oh, I couldn't possibly." Tommy gave him a smile that could have persuaded customs officers to hand over their stamps. "For a moment," he said. The clerk hesitated, then surrendered the ledger. Tommy took out his pencil and copied the entry into his notebook, every curl and crossbar, then closed the book with care. "Thank you," he said. "If anyone asks, you never saw me." The clerk blinked. "But I—" "Splendid. Keep it that way." He left before the man could gather courage to object. Outside, the sun had climbed behind a film of cloud, the sort of flat light that made London look like an overexposed photograph. As Tommy crossed Whitehall, the weight of what he'd seen settled in. Someone was not only reviving Dovecote, they were doing so through him. He imagined Tuppence's expression when he told her. She'd go perfectly still first, then start rearranging the facts as though solving a jigsaw by instinct. He smiled despite himself. The partnership worked. He collected trouble. She named it. At that moment, Tuppence Beresford was collecting trouble of her own. Mrs. Vane's drawing room was a study in contrasts, austerity draped in elegance. A single rose stood in a cut-glass vase. The clock ticked too quietly. Tuppence sat primly on the sofa while Mrs. Vane poured tea with deliberate grace. "I was delighted you called," said Mrs. Vane. "It's so rare to find good conversation in these buildings. Most neighbours prefer gossip." "I've found conversation and gossip to be the same thing, merely with better grammar," said Tuppence. Mrs. Vane smiled faintly. "You always did have wit." Tuppence's hand paused on her cup. "Always?" "Your reputation precedes you, Mrs. Beresford." The silence that followed was like silk pulled taut. Tuppence took a slow sip, her mind racing. "One tries to be memorable," she said lightly. "I hope never for the wrong reasons." "Quite." Mrs. Vane's eyes flicked to the mantel. "You admire photographs?" There were several, all in silver frames arranged with military precision. Tuppence rose to look more closely. One picture drew her eye immediately, a group of officers in wartime uniform, among them, half-turned, smiling toward the camera, the same face from the Lisbon photo. Her pulse quickened. "Your husband?" Mrs. Vane's tone cooled. "Yes, Edward. He was stationed in Portugal before his death." "And the others?" "Colleagues, friends." Tuppence's fingers brushed the frame. "This one, curious. He looks familiar." "Does he?" Mrs. Vane's voice was too smooth. "You must have seen many faces during your service." Tuppence smiled. "Enough to remember the dangerous ones." For an instant something flickered behind the veil of composure, fear, or perhaps guilt. "You interest me, Mrs. Beresford," said Mrs. Vane. "You always seem to arrive just before the storm breaks." Tuppence set down the photo. "That's our hobby, weather forecasting." Mrs. Vane laughed softly, but the sound didn't reach her eyes. When Tuppence left 10 minutes later, the air in the corridor felt heavier. She stood outside number 9 for a long moment before turning upstairs. As she reached her own landing, she caught sight of an envelope on the mat. Her name, neat and unhurried. Inside was a single sheet bearing 4 words: "They will come tonight." Tommy arrived home just as she finished reading it. He took one look at her face. "What's happened?" "Plenty," she said. "But you first." He recounted the archive visit, the forged signature, the initials EV. When he finished, she handed him the anonymous note. "They'll come tonight," he read aloud. "Comforting. Shall we lay out sandwiches?" She ignored the humour. "Mrs. Vane knows about Dovecote, and I saw him, Tommy, Garland, or someone who was there with him, in her photograph." "That's impossible. Garland died." "Then someone else is wearing his smile." He frowned. "Suppose Vane, the husband, wasn't the only one in that picture. Suppose Garland survived under another name." "Or suppose Mrs. Vane isn't a widow," said Tuppence quietly. "Suppose she's the widow in name only, hiding for him." Tommy poured himself a whiskey. "That would explain the matchbox, the code, everything. She's warning us because she's terrified of whoever forged my name." Tuppence's gaze flicked to the window. "Or luring us. The note could be a trap." He set down his glass. "Then we'll be ready either way." They checked locks, drew curtains, and waited. Outside, the streetlights came on in a line like patient sentinels. Somewhere below, a taxi idled and moved away. In the hush that followed, the flat felt like a held breath. A floorboard creaked in the corridor. Tommy gestured silently. Tuppence moved to the door, hand poised on the knob. The sound came again, not stealthy, but deliberate. A folded slip of paper slid under the door and stopped at her foot. She stooped, picked it up, unfolded it. A single sentence in the same careful hand. "Check the ministry ledger again. Second page." Tommy stared. "Someone's feeding us breadcrumbs." "Then tomorrow," said Tuppence. "At first light, we follow the trail." She laid the note beside the others on the desk, a small, silent constellation of warnings, and for a long moment neither spoke. Somewhere in the distance a clock struck 9, marking time for a game that had begun again. "Tommy," said Tuppence, "we've been invited to a pub meeting, and you're not allowed to call it quaint." He looked up from the armchair, where the evening paper lay folded at the murder column. "A pub meeting? With whom? Your Women's Institute informant or the ghost of Operation Dovecote?" "Neither." She held out a slip of paper. "Name's Ralston. Remember him? Coded messages by carrier pigeon, 1944. You once said he could smuggle a secret past a customs dog and make it look like charity." Tommy frowned. "Ralston? Thought he disappeared after the armistice." "Apparently he's reappeared, very much alive and very much in need of conversation. He left a note at the porter's lodge. 'I know who took the file, the past isn't sleeping.'" He whistled softly. "Charming. Where does he propose we hold this séance?" "A place called the Bell and Whistle, Dockside. He's to be there at 8. Nothing like a picturesque murder setting to lift the evening, said Tommy. Did you tell Albert? Of course. He's tailing Mrs. Vane. She left number 9 an hour ago carrying a parcel wrapped like a ham but far too heavy for one. He'll report if she stops for tea or treason. Tommy stood, adjusting his tie. Very well, Mrs. Beresford, let's go fishing, and hope the catch isn't our own obituary. The Bell and Whistle crouched at the river's edge, a crooked timber house with smoke leaking from its chimney and laughter that didn't reach the eyes. A fog was creeping off the Thames, softening lights, turning men into silhouettes and puddles into mirrors. Inside, the air was thick with beer and tobacco. A gramophone in the corner wheezed out "You Made Me Love You," a sentimental choice for a place that smelled of regret. Ralston waited in a corner booth, face half hidden by his hat. When he saw them, he rose stiffly. The years had thinned him, sharpened the cheekbones, and turned his eyes wary as a fox's. "Tommy, twopence!" His voice rasped like a match being struck. "You haven't changed." "Flattery from a man with our file in his pocket would be more convincing," said Tuppence. She slid into the booth. "You said you knew who took it." Ralston gave a smile without humour. "I said I know. Whether I tell depends." "On what?" asked Tommy. "On whether you still believe in tidy endings." He leaned forward. "The past's a dangerous beast, Beresford. It bites hardest when you pretend it's over." "Then stop growling and start talking," said Tuppence. He poured himself a measure of gin from the chipped bottle on the table. His hands trembled slightly. "You remember Dovecote's courier network, the Lisbon chain?" Tommy nodded. "Whistler, Vickers, the code drops under the church steps." Ralston's eyes gleamed. "There was another courier, one you never knew." Tuppence tilted her head. "Mrs. Vane?" His hand froze halfway to his mouth. "You do know, then?" "We know she's a widow who remembers code names she shouldn't," said Tommy, "and that someone's used my signature to steal what's left of Dovecote." Ralston's gaze darted round the room. "Walls have ears even when they've forgotten how to listen. I'll speak plain enough, but not too plain." Tuppence leaned closer. "Then give us half-truths if you must. We're good at finishing sentences." He smiled faintly. "Still the same." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "This is a list of transfers. Funds moved through neutral banks in 44. The names on it were meant to vanish. Someone's making sure they don't." "And the missing file?" "Contains the originals. Whoever holds it can ruin or resurrect anyone named there." "Who forged my husband's name to take it?" Tuppence asked. Ralston hesitated. "Someone who knows your habits, handwriting, even your inside jokes. Someone who's watched you longer than you've watched them." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" "I can't say more," he muttered. "Not yet. But I'll give you this. The traitor wasn't the man we buried. Dovecote's betrayal came from inside Whitehall itself." The gramophone clicked as the record ended, leaving a hush. Somewhere near the bar, a glass shattered. Tuppence said softly, "You're frightened, Ralston. Why meet us if it risks your neck?" "Because it's already been promised." He took another drink, hand shaking worse. "I was told to deliver a message, not to survive it." Tommy stiffened. "What message?" Ralston's lips twitched in a ghost of irony. "That old debts are being settled. And names." He broke off suddenly, coughing. The glass slipped from his fingers, striking the table's edge and spinning away. For a moment he struggled to rise, his eyes wide and unseeing. "Ralston?" Tuppence reached for him. He gasped, voice strangled. "Vane, not the widow." Then he collapsed face down on the scarred wood. Tommy caught him before he fell to the floor. But the man was already gone, breath stilled, hand rigid around the empty gin bottle. Tuppence touched his throat, then looked up. "Poison," she said quietly. "Fast acting." Tommy's eyes swept the room. No one looked their way. The bartender wiped glasses with deliberate disinterest. The customers were suddenly deaf. "Someone wanted him silenced before he finished that sentence," he muttered. "Vane, not the widow." "What does that even mean?" whispered Tuppence. "Not the widow, then who?" "Maybe Vane isn't dead at all." She shivered. "Then Mrs. Vane's not a widow. She's camouflage." A commotion began near the door. 2 men in uniform entered, local constables. Someone must have slipped out and summoned them. Tommy rose. "We can't stay." Running looks guilty, said Tuppence. Staying looks arrested. Pick one. He took her hand, guiding her through the back passage. They emerged into the fog-drenched alley where crates and barrels lined the wall like sentries. Behind them, the faint buzz of voices grew louder, discovery imminent. This way. Tommy led her toward the river stairs. The fog thickened, swallowing the lamplight. At the water's edge, a tugboat horn wailed mournfully, masking the sound of their footsteps. Tuppence whispered, "He was right. The past isn't sleeping. Nor is whoever poisoned him." Tommy pulled her into the shadow of a warehouse doorway as the constable's lantern beams swept across the quay. For several minutes they waited, breath held. A rat skittered by, the river lapped, oily and indifferent. Finally the lights receded. Tuppence straightened. "We're now fugitives. Again. You realize how tedious this is becoming?" "Utterly," said Tommy. "But it does keep us young." She smiled faintly despite herself. "That list he mentioned, transfers, names, did he drop it?" Tommy checked the booth's memory, then patted his pocket. "I slipped it out when he collapsed. Old habits." He unfolded the paper under a street lamp. Most of the ink was blurred, but 2 names remained legible, E. Vickers and E. Vane. 2 EVs, said Tuppence. 1 retired, 1 dead, supposedly. That ledger initial wasn't a coincidence. "And Ralston knew it," Tommy said, "but didn't live to tell." A police whistle shrilled in the distance. They moved quickly through the maze of alleys until they reached the broader street. A cab loomed out of the fog, lantern swinging. Tommy flagged it down. "Chelsea," he told the driver, "and if anyone asks, we're honeymooners." The cab rattled forward. Inside, the smell of damp leather mingled with river mist. Tuppence leaned back, eyes closed. "Tommy, we're being played by professionals. Ralston's death makes us the last people he spoke to, which means the police will want an encore performance." She opened her eyes. "And the poison. It wasn't in his glass when we arrived." "No, it was waiting in the bottle," he frowned. "Someone at that pub knew exactly which table we'd choose." "So the invitation came through them. Ralston never wrote it, he only signed it." Tommy nodded slowly. "And whoever arranged it wanted us there to watch him die." "For effect?" "For credibility. We'll be the perfect suspects. Conveniently close, historically shady." She gave a short laugh. "How flattering. Our reputations have matured." The cab jolted over cobblestones. Through the window, London blurred into streaks of gaslight and shadow. Somewhere beyond, a clock struck 10. Tuppence turned the folded list in her hands. 2 EVs. Which one's ours?" "Both, perhaps," said Tommy. "Vickers retired conveniently before the theft. Vane allegedly died conveniently before it mattered. 2 exits, same initials, same ghost." "And the dying words, Vane not the widow. If he meant Vane's alive, then Mrs. Vane's part of the masquerade," he finished. "A decoy." The cab slowed at a crossing. Outside, a newsboy was calling, "Dockside death. Ex-agent found dead in pub." Tommy grimaced. Fast work. The press beats the police again. Tuppence drew the curtain. "Let's hope they haven't included our portraits." When they reached Donat South Audley Mansions, Albert opened the door before they knocked. His face was pale. "Thank goodness," he whispered. "There's been coppers asking for you. Said a man's been murdered and you 2 were seen leaving." "Splendid," said Tommy. "Did you offer them tea or alibis?" "Neither, sir. I told them you were in Wales visiting a sick aunt." "Excellent improvisation. I don't have one." "Exactly, sir. Hard to contradict." Tuppence smiled weakly. "Any sign of Mrs. Vane?" "Not since this afternoon. Her flat's dark." Tommy hung up his coat. "Which means she knows what happened, and she's either hiding or running." Tuppence unfolded Ralston's blurred list and pinned it to their notice board beside the other clues. The sheet fluttered in the draught, like a flag of war. "Well, Tommy," she said softly, "the game's no longer about secrets. It's about survival." He looked at her, the old spark in his eyes. "Then let's make sure we survive long enough to solve it." The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, sharp, deliberate, and far too loud in the silence that followed. The sound reached them before the sight did, a faint creak as the door swung open on its own. Tuppence stopped mid-step on the landing. "Tommy," she said quietly, We didn't leave the door ajar. He moved past her, hand on the knob. The flat greeted them with silence, that peculiar kind of silence that has recently been disturbed. A drawer hung open in the hall table. A vase lay shattered beside the umbrella stand. Inside, the disorder grew worse. Files, papers, books. Their once tidy study looked as though a bureaucratic hurricane had passed through. Tommy let out a low whistle. Well, if it's burglars, they've excellent taste. They've ignored the silver and gone straight for the paperwork. Tuppence crossed to her desk, scanning the debris. All my wartime notes. Rifled. But look, nothing else touched. Jewelry's still here. Even Albert's prize model of the Spitfire remains unmolested. A voice came from the doorway. That's because I never let nobody in, Mum. Albert stood there, hands twisting his cap, guilt written all over him. I swear on me, Mum, I didn't. I went out for 20 minutes just to fetch milk. Came back, everything quiet. Thought you two was home. Tuppence softened. It's not your fault, Albert. Whoever came knew precisely what they wanted. Tommy crouched, running a finger along the broken drawer's edge. No signs of forcing. They had keys. Or skill. Albert's eyes darted nervously toward the corridor. Funny thing, though. Nothing's taken from the other rooms. Just these papers and, something odd on the stairs. What sort of odd? Asked Tommy. Albert hesitated. You'd best see for yourselves. He led them to the stairwell between floors. Here, under the second tread, I noticed a scratch while sweeping. Looks like letters. Tommy knelt, flicked open his lighter and squinted. Carved faintly into the wood, half hidden by dust, were words. Truth lies under the house of names. He whistled. That's our intruder leaving autographs. Tuppence crouched beside him. Or a message. House of names. Tommy, that phrase. It rings of Dovecote. How so? In the Lisbon files, remember? The House of Names referred to the alias registry, the government's ledger of assumed identities used in covert ops. If truth lies under it, then perhaps something's hidden in that registry. Tommy straightened, meaning we need to see that file, which conveniently would be sealed tighter than Buckingham Palace after curfew. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. Then we'll just have to be imaginative. Albert looked wary. Imaginative as in legal, ma'am? Imaginative as in effective, said Tuppence. Fetch my blue hat and your most innocent expression. We're going visiting. The Government Records Office was housed in a building so drab it seemed deliberately designed to discourage curiosity. The foyer smelled of ink and caution. Clerks shuffled papers with the solemnity of priests guarding relics. Tuppence entered first, all charm and tweed. Good afternoon, she said brightly to the young man at the counter. I'm Mrs. Anthony, here to verify a few personnel records on behalf of the Historical Bureau. The clerk blinked. The what, madam? Oh dear, she said apologetically. Do forgive me. They never inform the juniors, do they? It's part of the new internal audit on alias files, Section 4. She dropped the phrase with practiced confidence. Bureaucrats loved sections. The clerk flushed. I see. You have credentials? She produced a card. It bore the embossed crest of the ministry, genuine, though acquired under circumstances she preferred not to detail. Of course. And this is Mr. Meadows, she added, gesturing to Tommy. Tommy, embodying bureaucratic indifference, murmured, Field inspection only, no removals. The clerk looked uncertain. If you'll wait a moment, I'll fetch the overseer. As he vanished, Tommy leaned in. You're getting frightfully good at lying to civil servants. It's a transferable skill, she whispered. Besides, technically we are inspecting an alias file, ours. 5 minutes later, they were escorted down a corridor lined with filing cabinets that hummed faintly with the memory of secrets. The overseer, a middle-aged man with pince-nez and the moral rigidity of a metronome, unlocked a door marked Restricted Access, Identity Records. I'll have to remain present, he said. Regulations. Of course, Tuppence smiled. We thrive under supervision. The room was cold, lit by a single green-shaded lamp. Shelves reached the ceiling, each filled with leather-bound ledgers. The overseer opened one at random. Here's the alias registry for wartime operatives, name cross-referenced by code and assignment. Tuppence scanned the columns. Each line listed 2 names, the real and the false. The handwriting varied, careful, hurried, occasionally desperate. "Fascinating," she murmured, flipping pages with deliberate slowness while her mind raced. "Truth lies under the house of names." She turned another page and froze. "Here we are," she said softly. "Operation Dovecote, Lisbon Chain. See? Code 43A. Tommy leaned over. The entries read Whistler, Garland, J. Meadows, Beresford T. Sparrow, Beresford P. Falcon, Vane E. "Falcon," said Tommy. "That's her husband, or so she claims." But beneath those names was an additional line, inked later in smaller script. Meadows, Beresford T. Duplicate registration, 1945. "Duplicate?" whispered Tuppence. "Tommy, they've copied your identity." The overseer cleared his throat. "Something wrong?" "Merely astonishment," said Tommy smoothly. "I had no idea we'd been so popular." Tuppence pointed. "This duplicate registration, what does it mean?" The overseer adjusted his pince-nez. When an alias was reused after the war, sometimes for training exercises or cover operations, they marked it as duplication. "Reused by whom?" she pressed. He hesitated. "That information would require further clearance." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Then perhaps we might simply glance at the continuation file." Before he could protest, she turned the page. A new list appeared. Post-war aliases, dates, handlers. And there it was, neat as a signature. Meadows, Thomas Beresford. Active 1951. Present. Her hand trembled. Present. Tommy's mouth tightened. "Someone's walking about London under my name." The overseer looked alarmed. "That's quite impossible. These files are locked. No one accesses them without authority." "Then your locks have developed hobbies," said Tommy. Tuppence closed the ledger softly. "Thank you for your help. We've seen what we needed." The overseer blinked. "But you've not—" "We'll submit the rest through channels," she said briskly. "Come along, Mr. Meadows." They left before the man's confusion turned into curiosity. A short walk in silence carried them to the corner, and the first tea shop opened for late morning custom. Outside, the air felt almost too bright after the archive's gloom. They walked briskly toward the corner, neither speaking until they were clear of the building. "Well," said Tommy finally, "someone's doing an excellent impersonation. They've borrowed my handwriting, my wartime code name, and now my identity." Tuppence's expression hardened. "And that someone used it to steal the file." "Which means," he said grimly, "whoever forged that ledger entry also signed me out of existence." They stopped at a tea shop, ordered mechanically, and sat in silence for a moment as cups clinked faintly around them. Tuppence stirred her tea, lost in thought. "Truth lies under the house of names. The registry was the house, but the truth is under it," finished Tommy, "meaning perhaps another record beneath, hidden." She smiled suddenly. "You're learning to think poetically, dear." Pure self-defense. She opened her handbag and withdrew a small notebook. Inside were careful sketches of what she'd seen, the page, the handwriting, the dates. This duplicate was entered years after Dovecote closed. Someone revived it to act under your identity. Could Vane be that someone? If he survived, he'd have access. Perhaps, but the handwriting was finer than his military scrawl, and the ink newer still. Tommy rubbed his temple. "So we have a living double, an elegant widow, and a corpse who might not be one. If I didn't know better, I'd think someone was writing an absurd novel about us." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Let's hope it ends better than most thrillers." They reached home just as the lamps flickered on along the street. Albert met them at the door, breathless. "Beg pardon, but there's been another visitor. Left this on the mat." He handed over a folded envelope. Inside was a single card, its message typed neatly. "You've opened one door too many. Close it before it closes you." Tuppence exhaled. Charming. No signature, naturally. Tommy scanned the hall. "Any sign who delivered it?" Albert shook his head. "No, sir, just appeared, though I thought I heard a car drive off sharpish." Tuppence slipped the card beside the others on their desk. "We're collecting quite the correspondence. Anonymous letters are becoming the fashion." Tommy crouched by the stairs again, running his fingers over the carved message. "It led us to the truth, at least partially." She joined him, touching the rough letters. "But there's still the question, who carved it?" "Ralston couldn't have. He was dead before this. Mrs. Vane's too delicate for carpentry. Albert looked nervous. Maybe it was already there, sir, hidden from the war. Tommy met Tuppence's eyes, or someone wanted to ensure we found it. She stood, smoothing her skirt, in which case they're directing us, step by step, towards something larger. He nodded. And at the next step, we'll find out who's really walking around under my name. That night, long after Albert had gone to bed, they sat in the dim light of the sitting room, the ledger copy spread between them. Tuppence traced the inked name with one finger. Thomas Beresford, active 1951 to present. If that's true, you're currently serving a government you haven't spoken to in years. Splendid, said Tommy dryly. Do you suppose I'm drawing a salary? But humour couldn't mask the unease in his voice. Tuppence, what if the reason we're being framed isn't to discredit us, but to replace us? She looked up. You mean someone wants to erase the originals? Exactly. And perhaps Dovecote wasn't the end of that plan, merely the rehearsal. The mantel clock ticked evenly, each sound too loud in the quiet. Tuppence said softly, Then we'd better make sure the world remembers which Beresfords are real. By morning, after a night of uneasy planning and copied notes from the ledger, they were already on the road again. Abandoned country houses, said Tommy, are never really abandoned. They're only waiting for the next idiot to go poking about their secrets. Which, said Tuppence, tightening her scarf, would be us. They stood before the wrought iron gates of Blackridge Hall, a vast Georgian estate crouched beneath the slow roll of morning mist. Its windows were blind, its ivy long untrimmed. The once grand drive was half swallowed by weeds. Yet even in decay, the house managed dignity, the kind that suggested it disapproved of intruders, but would tolerate them if they brought answers. According to the files from Dovecote, Blackridge had served as a wartime intelligence relay, codename The House. If truth lay under the House of Names, then this was where it must rest. Tommy pushed the gate. It creaked with theatrical precision. Well, he said, the stage is set. Lead on, Mrs. Beresford. Let's see if ghosts accept visitors before lunch. The front doors surprisingly opened without resistance. Inside, air hung heavy with dust and neglect. The hall smelled faintly of damp wood and thyme. Tuppence trailed a gloved hand along the banister. No footprints, she murmured. No disturbance. Yet someone's paid the caretaker to keep the locks oiled. Someone who wanted easy access, said Tommy. They moved cautiously from room to room, a music salon where a piano sat beneath a veil of cobwebs, a drawing room frozen in time, as if awaiting a guest who never returned. On one wall hung a half-torn notice stamped Property of War Office. It feels like they simply walked out mid-conversation, Tuppence said. They probably did, preferably before the bombs fell. In the library she stopped before a cluster of framed photographs still lining the mantel. Officers, nurses, staff groups. Blackridge had been busy during the war. One photograph caught her eye. The same group from Lisbon, but this time clearly taken on English soil. And there, standing to the side, was the woman from the old photograph, her face unobscured, confident, sharp-featured, alive with humour. The real Mrs. Vane, Tuppence whispered. Tommy peered closer. Our neighbour's an excellent imitation then, right down to the hairstyle. She's no widow, Tuppence murmured. She's an echo. In a far corner of the library, they found a section of shelving that didn't quite match. Tommy pressed experimentally. The frame shifted inward with a groan. Hidden door, he said. I do admire craftsmanship. Behind it, a narrow stone stair descended into darkness. Tuppence produced a torch. Shall we? He sighed. I always hate rhetorical questions. The stairway spiraled downward into what had once been a cellar. At its base they found a steel door secured by a wheel lock mechanism. On its face, faintly visible, someone had scrawled Dovecote Archive in chalk. Tommy examined the lock. Looks like it hasn't been opened since 1945. But someone's tried recently. See the scratch marks? Perhaps our mysterious duplicate, said Tuppence, or the same person who left that message under our stairs. After several tense minutes, Tommy managed to twist the wheel free. The door swung open with a sigh like a long-held breath. The vault beyond was enormous, Metal shelves lined the walls, filled with decaying folders, rusted boxes, and dust that muffled every sound. The beam of Tuppence's torch swept across rows of classified labels, communications, field reports, personnel lists. She exhaled. The House of Names. Tommy's gaze caught on a stack of crates stamped with ministry insignia. Look at this. Photographic negatives labelled Lisbon Unit. Tuppence leaned closer, holding one against the torchlight. Shadowy figures appeared in silver outline, dovecoat agents, meetings, coded exchanges. She recognized Garland, herself, and Tommy, frozen in time. And behind them, faint but undeniable, stood the real Mrs. Vane. "Proof," said Tuppence softly. "She was there, the real one. And our Mrs. Vane upstairs is the counterfeit." He lifted a second negative, a portrait of a woman in uniform standing proudly beside a table strewn with maps. The lighting and composition were deliberate, almost artistic. "She must have been important," Tommy said. "A leader, perhaps." Tuppence nodded slowly. "Or the betrayed one." They moved deeper into the vault, where a side room branched off. Inside hung a single painting covered by a heavy cloth. Tuppence drew it back. The portrait was startling in its clarity. The same woman again, painted in oils, gaze calm yet defiant, wearing her uniform like armour. On the frame's brass plaque, "Margaret Vane, service beyond duty." Tuppence stared. She was real, decorated, honoured, and erased. "Someone replaced her with an imposter," Tommy said quietly, "and now that imposter lives across the hall from us." Tuppence's eyes moved to the lower edge of the painting, where faint scratches marred the wood. "Tommy, look, numbers." He bent closer. "Coordinates." "Then this isn't just a portrait, it's a map." While Tommy took note of the coordinates, Tuppence's torchlight flickered across a table of ledgers. One had been left open, its ink still dark. She read aloud softly. "Dovecoat roster, revised, code agents, cover names, and here, betrayal column." Tommy joined her. Names ran down the page, each followed by notes. Deceased, transferred, compromised. One entry had been struck through in red, Garland, and at the bottom scrawled almost illegibly, "Primary betrayal, redacted." "Someone deliberately removed the traitor's name," said Tuppence, "but this ledger proves there was one." "Which explains why someone wants the file destroyed," said Tommy. "Clean slate, clean conscience." She turned another page. A list of assets, delivery routes, bank transfers. The same EV initials appeared in the margin, linking both Vickers and Vane once again. "Whoever controlled these codes controlled the money," Tuppence murmured. He glanced around uneasily. "I don't like this quiet. It's too—" He broke off. A faint ticking sound had started somewhere near the shelves. Tuppence's head snapped up. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," said Tommy grimly, "and I don't think it's the heating." The tick quickened, rhythmic, metallic, deliberate. Tuppence scanned the shadows with the torch and saw behind a crate a small metal box fixed to the wall, a red light pulsing faintly on its side. "Tommy," she breathed, "that's a timed incendiary." He went pale. "A what?" "A self-destruct charge. Old intelligence trick burns evidence before discovery." They both lunged forward at once. Tuppence's fingers worked furiously at the latch. The ticking accelerated, becoming an urgent clatter. She yanked the wires free, just as a thin wisp of smoke curled upward. "Don't breathe," she whispered. "It's magnesium. Once it catches—" The box gave a sharp pop, smoke bursting into the air. Tuppence flinched backward. Tommy grabbed her wrist, dragging her clear as flame flared from the wall, licking across the nearest shelf. "Out!" he shouted. They stumbled through the vault doorway as the fire leapt higher, swallowing years of secrets in seconds. The heat pressed against their backs. Tommy slammed the steel door shut and spun the wheel. The clang reverberated through the stone passage. For a long moment they leaned against the wall, catching breath. Tuppence's face was smudged with soot. Tommy's sleeve bore a singe mark. "Note to self," he said between gasps. "Never touch wartime mechanisms. They hold grudges." She laughed shakily. "But we saved one ledger. The roster. It was in my bag." He looked at her in disbelief. "You grabbed it? In the middle of an explosion?" "I don't abandon paperwork," she said primly. "It's bad espionage etiquette." They emerged into daylight like fugitives from history. Behind them, the smoke coiled lazily from the house's chimneys, more a sigh than a blaze. The countryside lay silent, unbothered by the resurrection of old secrets. Tommy looked back. Whoever set that device expected anyone curious enough to die with the evidence. "Then they'll be disappointed," said Tuppence, "and very curious indeed when we don't." They walked toward the car parked discreetly in the lane. Tuppence opened her satchel and pulled out the charred ledger. Its edges were blackened, but most of the writing had survived. "See here," she said, flipping to the roster. "Code names, operations, transfers. Look at this column. Handler approved by. It's initialed EV throughout. Whoever EV was, they signed off every mission, including Dovecote." "And that same EV forged my name to steal the file," Tommy said slowly. "This ledger ties everything together." She nodded. "And the redacted betrayal, only one name missing. Whoever they weren't erased accidentally." Tommy started the engine. "Then we find the missing name and the living EV." As they drove away, a sleek black motorcar emerged from a copse half a mile behind them. Its engine purred, keeping distance but never losing sight. Inside, the driver's gloved hands rested lightly on the wheel. When Tuppence glanced back through the rear mirror, she caught a brief glint of metal, a small gold lion cufflink. "Tommy," she said quietly, "we're not alone." He didn't turn his head. "Bryce?" "Has to be. He wore the same cufflink at the embassy." "Then the Colonel's taking a personal interest. And following us from a burned-out vault hardly counts as social." They reached London by dusk. The city was in that hour of divided loyalties, neither day nor night, when lights began to bloom behind curtains and the hum of evening life stirred. At South Audley Mansions, Albert met them anxiously at the door. "I saw the paper, sir. Fire at some country estate. Said it used to be War Office property. You weren't—" "Entirely uninvolved," said Tommy, "which is why we smell faintly of smoke." Albert frowned. "Oh, that explains the singed eyebrow." Tuppence smiled faintly, handing him her coat. "Put the kettle on, Albert, and lock the door twice." In the study, they laid the ledger on the table and opened it beneath the lamplight. The ink shimmered faintly where the pages had been singed. Tuppence ran her finger down the roster again. Garland, Whistler, Vane, Beresford, and here, the redacted name, one line blacked out with thick ink, the only entry without signature. Tommy leaned closer. If this ledger was meant to burn, perhaps the person who redacted it was the one setting the fire. "And since Bryce followed us from the estate," said Tuppence softly, "we may assume he's no longer merely advising discretion." Tommy looked at her. "You think Bryce is EV?" "It fits the initials, and he's been circling us since the start. The question is, why use Mrs. Vane? Why stage the double life?" "Because," said Tommy slowly, "if the real Mrs. Vane was betrayed and killed during Dovecote, someone needed a replacement to control what she left behind. The money, the files, the reputation. Bryce supplies the cover. The imposter supplies the illusion." Tuppence closed the ledger gently. "Then we're dealing with a conspiracy built on substitution, names, identities, even lives. We were the rehearsal. Now they're perfecting the act." The clock on the mantel chimed 8, each note deliberate. Tommy reached for her hand. "Well, partner, the stage is crowded, the script confusing, and the villains under-rehearsed. Shall we take the next cue?" Tuppence smiled faintly. "We always do. There are few invitations in life one knows are a trap, and accepts anyway." Tuppence held the cream-coloured card between thumb and forefinger, as if it might smudge. "Colonel Bryce requests the pleasure of our company for dinner," she read aloud. "Pleasure seems an ambitious word, don't you think?" Tommy looked up from the sofa, where the day's newspaper was sprawled in surrender. "After following us from a burning vault, I'd call it sportier than pleasure." Albert, hovering by the doorway, frowned. "You're not going, are you, sir? Bloke like that invites you to dinner. It's not for the pudding." "That's precisely why we're going," said Tommy. "Nothing like supper with the opposition to see who flinches first." Tuppence studied the elegant handwriting. 8 o'clock, his club, Jermyn Street. Very proper. The battlefield, apparently, has silver cutlery. Albert muttered, If he serves you pie, I'd test it with a canary first. The club's dining room glowed with restrained opulence, mahogany panels, quiet chandeliers, waiters gliding with the reverence of priests. Only the ticking of a long-case clock disturbed the hush. Bryce stood as they entered, every inch the officer, silver hair clipped neat, uniform replaced by dinner jacket, authority clinging to him like aftershave. "Beresford's," he said smoothly. "How good of you to come. I wasn't sure you'd feel inclined." "We're famously inclined toward good food," said Tommy lightly, "and toward answers." "Then we're perfectly matched." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Shall we?" They were led to a table near the window. Through the glass, London shimmered faintly, lights on wet pavements, taxis gliding like shadows. A perfect night for uneasy civility. The waiter poured wine. Bryce raised his glass. To old comradeships, and to keeping history where it belongs. Tuppence clinked hers gently. "Underground, you mean?" He smiled thinly. "You have a talent for subtext, Mrs. Beresford." Years of practice. Dinner began with smoked trout and conversation that moved like chess, polite, deliberate, never honest. "So," said Bryce, cutting his fish with surgical precision, "you've been revisiting our old operations, stirring ghosts best left to rot. Admirable curiosity, if somewhat ill-advised." "Curiosity is how we survived the war," said Tommy. "And how many didn't," said Bryce evenly. "Some matters were concluded with reason. Dovecote, for instance." Tuppence dabbed her lips with her napkin. "You mean the betrayal?" Bryce's knife paused, almost imperceptibly. "Strong word, that." "Accurate word," she said. "We've seen the roster, and the missing name." He recovered instantly, voice smooth. "The roster's apocryphal. Half the records were destroyed years ago." "Conveniently, yes," said Tommy, "in a vault that happened to catch fire yesterday." Bryce's eyes flicked up sharply. "I heard about that. Nasty business. I do hope you weren't nearby." "Oh, only in the neighbourhood," said Tuppence. "Research interests." "Ah." He refilled their glasses himself, hostily to the point of menace. "Still chasing phantoms? I should warn you, phantoms tend to resent attention." Tommy leaned back. "We've met worse-tempered ones." The second course arrived. Roast duck with orange glaze, presented like a peace treaty under candlelight. Conversation softened, but not the tension. Bryce carved neatly, hands steady. "You must understand, Beresford, the war created messes not meant for tidy minds. Some operations required silence, even deception. Dovecote was one. If a few files were adapted, it was for the greater good." "The greater good being whose?" asked Tuppence. He smiled faintly. "The country's. Always the country's." "That's a generous country," she said. "One that forges signatures, replaces widows, and plants explosives under old secrets." For the first time, the Colonel's poise wavered. His hand jerked just enough for the wine to ripple in his glass. Then he set it down deliberately. "I'd advise you," he said softly, "to tread carefully, Mrs. Beresford. The past is an unstable floor. It can collapse under too much weight." Tommy smiled politely. "And yet, you invited us to dance on it." Bryce met his eyes across the candlelight. "Because you're meddling in affairs far above your old clearance, and because I once respected you, I hoped a civilized supper might persuade you to stop before it's too late." Tuppence tilted her head. "Before what, exactly?" Before he could answer, a soft voice interrupted from behind them. "Colonel, forgive me, I'm late." Tuppence turned and froze. Mrs. Vane stood in the doorway, elegant as ever, dressed in black satin and pearls. She smiled with a serenity that mocked recognition. "I see our table's already lively." Tommy rose automatically. "Mrs. Vane, how unexpected." Bryce gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "My guest. I believe you've met." Tuppence's fingers tightened on her napkin. "Frequently. The walls in our building are quite thin." Vane's smile was smooth. "Then I do hope you haven't been listening. Only when there's something worth hearing." The four of them sat, the tableau now complete, predator and prey arranged like partners at a card table. The waiters moved around them silently, refilling glasses as if afraid to intrude. Vane leaned forward. "Colonel Bryce tells me you've been busy, Mrs. Beresford, investigating old ghosts." Not ghosts, said Tuppence. Impostors. The other woman's eyes glinted. How dramatic. Merely accurate, said Tommy. We've seen the portrait, the real Mrs. Vane. You wear her name very well. For the briefest moment the mask slipped, a tremor, a flicker of fury. Then it was gone. How romantic, she said. To believe in authenticity. Bryce's voice cut through the air. Enough riddles. We all know where this leads. Do we? Asked Tuppence. Because from where I sit, it looks remarkably like blackmail with better cutlery. Bryce's mouth tightened. You overestimate your importance, Mrs. Beresford. All we require is your discretion. A small matter. Stop asking questions. Destroy that ledger. And if we don't? Asked Tommy. Then you'll find yourselves very much like Ralston, said Vane softly. Sudden, unfortunate, and unmissed. The threat hung in the air, cold and intimate. Tuppence smiled sweetly. You should have led with that. I do adore an honest threat. Dessert arrived. Creme brulee with brittle caramel, the kind that shatters at a touch. Bryce lifted his spoon. Let's not ruin a fine meal with dramatics. I've always admired your courage and your restraint. Don't spoil my opinion. Tommy swirled his brandy, expression mild. We'd hate to disappoint, though restraint isn't really our line of work. Vane laughed softly. You'll find courage less rewarding without an audience. Fortunately, said Tuppence, we've already chosen ours. At that, both conspirators looked briefly confused, just long enough. Tommy's hand, casual and precise, tipped his glass. Brandy spilled across the linen and raced toward the candle's flame. A small whoosh followed, a harmless flicker of fire that drew immediate alarm from the waiters. Oh, clumsy me, said Tommy cheerfully. Terribly sorry. Nerves, perhaps. The waiter rushed forward with a cloth. The brief blaze smoked and died, leaving the table in chaos. In the confusion, Tuppence rose, murmured apologies, and slipped her hand through Tommy's arm. Terribly embarrassing, she told Bryce. We'll spare you further disaster and see ourselves out. Bryce half rose. Sit down. But the waiter, flustered, blocked him with a flurry of apologies and towels. By the time he stepped clear, the Beresfords were gone, moving swiftly through the marble corridor toward the coat room. Outside, the club's doorman hailed a taxi before they reached the pavement. London night pressed close, sharp air, soft drizzle, street lamps reflected in the wet cobbles. Tuppence climbed in first, pulling the door shut as Tommy followed. South Audley Mansions, he told the driver, and step on it. As the cab moved off, Tuppence let out a slow breath. Well, she said, I do love an evening that begins with soup and ends with extortion. Tommy grinned faintly. The Colonel's charm has certainly matured into menace. Did you see his hand shake when you mentioned the ledger? Yes, and Mrs. Vane's when you called her by name. The portrait unmasked them both. He nodded. Bryce is our EV, no doubt now. The same initials, the same arrogance. He's been using her to rewrite Dovecote's history, one convenient forgery at a time. And the ledger we rescued proves it, said Tuppence. He's trying to make us destroy the only evidence linking him to the betrayal. She glanced out the window. The city blurred past, theatres closing, buses hissing to stops, the heartbeat of London steady and indifferent. He won't stop now, Tommy. He can't afford to. Tommy leaned back. Then we'll have to be less predictable. I'm done waiting for his next move. They reached home just past 11. Albert met them at the door, expression pale. You've had visitors again. Left this. He handed over a sealed envelope. Inside was a single card, typewritten as before. Last warning, you've had your dinner. Next comes the reckoning. Tuppence sighed. At least they're polite correspondence. Tommy tossed the card onto the mantel. I prefer dessert first myself. Albert hovered. Shall I call the police, sir? Not yet, said Tommy. We'll need proof before we hand them ghosts. Tuppence turned to him. Bryce won't let us breathe freely while we hold that ledger. We need to move it somewhere safe. Agreed. Somewhere he'd never dare look. Albert brightened. What about Aunt Ada's old trunk in the basement? No one's touched it since the Blitz. Tuppence smiled. Excellent idea. Hide truth beneath the family relics. Poetic symmetry. Later, after Albert retired, Tommy and Tuppence sat with the fire low, the ledger between them. The lamplight threw long shadows, making the room intimate, conspiratorial. Tuppence traced the singed edge of the pages. One missing name, Bryce's operation, his impostor, all leading to this. But who was the betrayer he protected? Tommy frowned. He erased them to save himself. The redacted name could expose both, the traitor and his enabler. She looked up, her voice soft. "Do you think it was love? Mrs. Vane, or whoever she is, doesn't strike me as loyal out of duty." Tommy nodded slowly. "Love, perhaps, or the kind of debt that corrodes into obedience. Either way, they're bound together." Tuppence smiled faintly. How romantic. Treason with affection. He reached for her hand. At least ours leans toward curiosity. They sat a moment longer in silence, the city murmuring beyond the windows. Somewhere below, a car engine idled, then drove away. The quiet settled again, like the pause between moves in a dangerous game. "Tommy," said Tuppence, "if Bryce invited us to dinner to intimidate us, he's failed." "Oh, he intimidated me thoroughly," said Tommy. "I've never eaten faster in my life." She laughed softly. "Good. We'll need our strength, because after tonight, he knows we won't stop." He looked toward the darkened window where their reflections sat side by side, two figures against a world of mirrors and masks. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we strike first." The envelope arrived just after breakfast, tucked neatly beneath the morning paper. Albert, still in his apron, handed it over with suspicion. "No postmark, sir. Just dropped through the door. Gave me the willies, if you don't mind me saying." Tuppence looked up from her teacup. "If you mean that pleasant tingling sensation that usually precedes trouble, we've grown rather fond of it." Tommy slit the envelope. Inside lay a single folded sheet, typed in the same careful font as their previous warnings. "Meet me tonight. Dock 12, River Wharf. Bring no one. The truth you seek is there. It will clear your name." He read it twice before handing it across. Tuppence frowned. Anonymous allies never come with tea and biscuits. "True," said Tommy, "but truth that clears your name has such a fetching ring to it, very nearly irresistible." Albert, hovering, said darkly, "So that's a yes, then?" Tuppence tapped the note thoughtfully. "It's a, we'll decide after dinner. No one likes being ambushed on an empty stomach." The River Wharf was one of those places London pretends to forget, a tangle of warehouses and rusting cranes, where the Thames lapped sluggishly against stone. Lamps flickered uncertainly along the dockside, their light half swallowed by the rising mist. Tommy parked the car 2 streets away. "A perfect evening for treachery," he said. "I wonder if the Met would appreciate advance notice." "They'd only arrest us for trespassing," said Tuppence. "Besides, we've been ambushed before. We're practically professionals." She buttoned her coat and slipped a small revolver into her pocket, a relic of their wartime escapades. "Just in case." "Ah," said Tommy, smiling faintly. "Romance lives." They reached Dock 12 shortly after 9. The river whispered against the pilings. A distant bell clanged, lonely and hollow. Crates were stacked high, forming narrow corridors of shadow. Somewhere nearby, a rope creaked. Tuppence's voice was low. "If this were one of your detective thrillers, this is precisely where the heroine says something feels wrong, and the hero says, 'Nonsense, my dear,' and promptly gets hit over the head," said Tommy, "which is why we'll skip the script." They advanced carefully between the crates. Then Tuppence stopped. "Tommy," she murmured, "look." Pinned to a wooden post was another note, a single word scrawled in red pencil, "Inside." He exhaled. "They're considerate, at least. Directions included." "Or handwriting practice before the murder," she muttered. They followed the narrow passage to a corrugated iron door slightly ajar. A faint yellow light glowed within. Tommy nudged it open with care. The warehouse interior smelled of oil and river water. Lamps hung from the beams, their filaments humming faintly. Dust drifted like slow snow in the air. In the centre of the floor stood a small wooden table with a single envelope resting on it. Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "How theatrical." Tommy approached cautiously, eyes sweeping the rafters. He reached the table and turned the envelope over. No writing, no seal. He opened it and withdrew a single photograph. It was a picture of them, Tommy and Tuppence, entering the Ministry archives days ago. "Well," said Tuppence softly, "that confirms our fan club is growing." The warehouse door slammed shut behind them with a clang. Tommy spun around. "Company," he said grimly. Shapes emerged from the shadows, 3 men in dark coats, their faces half hidden. One carried a length of pipe, another flicked open a knife that caught the lamplight. Tuppence muttered, We really must stop attending these invitations. The men closed in. Evening, said Tommy. We don't have change for the collection plate, the leader grunted. You've been asking the wrong questions. And you've been giving the wrong answers, said Tuppence, backing toward a crate stack. Shall we call it even? Before they could reply, another voice cut through the space. Smooth, cold, unmistakable. Evening, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. I did say we'd meet again. Mrs. Vane stepped into the light. She was dressed for morning, black coat, black gloves, her face pale against the colourless backdrop. In her hand she held a small revolver gleaming dully beneath the lamp. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. I must say, Mrs. Vane, you make an entrance worthy of the theatre. I was raised among actors, said the woman. Pretending is hereditary. Tommy moved subtly to one side, gauging distance. We'd applaud, but the setting's poor, bit drafty. Mrs. Vane ignored him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Tuppence. I warned you once to leave this alone, but you insisted on digging. That's the trouble with curiosity, said Tuppence. It insists on answers. Then have one, Vane said softly. You were right about the portrait. The woman in that painting was my mother. Tuppence's breath caught. Your mother? She was Margaret Vane, decorated, brilliant, and the one who betrayed Dovecote. Tommy's jaw tightened. That's impossible. No, said Vane, it's history. She sold information to the highest bidder. German intermediaries, black channels. The operation collapsed. Dozens died. My father covered for her. When she was exposed, he took the blame and a bullet. Tuppence said quietly, and you've spent your life rewriting the story. Vane's voice trembled, not with weakness but conviction. Correcting it. You see, your husband's name appears in that ledger, Thomas Beresford. My mother's ruin was built on his intelligence report. Tommy's voice was level. Your mother's guilt was proven. By forged documents, Vane's eyes burned. Documents he authorized. My family's name was blackened while yours went on to publish memoirs of heroism. So now we balance the scales. So, you forged his name, said Tuppence slowly. You stole the Dovecote file to frame us, to rewrite your tragedy as justice. Vane smiled faintly. History will decide who framed whom. She raised the gun. I'm not here to kill you, merely to deliver you to the truth. Behind them, the three men moved closer, one carrying rope. Tuppence felt the air shift, the heat of danger tightening like wire. Then she noticed something, a small brass key on a chain around Vane's neck, glinting when she moved. Her instincts sharpened. That key, she said suddenly. It's the Ledger Vault's spare, isn't it? Vane froze for a heartbeat, just enough. Tommy took the moment. He kicked over the table. The lamp crashed, glass shattering. Darkness leapt across the room. Run, he shouted. The next moments blurred into sound and movement. Footsteps pounding, shouts, the crack of a gunshot that ricocheted off metal. Tuppence ducked behind a crate. A bullet bit splinters where her head had been. Tommy, she called. Still alive, thank you. His voice came from somewhere to her left, followed by a solid thud and a groan, one assailant down. Another lunged from the shadows. Tuppence swung the fallen lamp base into his shin. He yelped, stumbling. She darted past him, straight into Mrs. Vane. The woman's face was inches from hers, eyes glittering. You think you can steal truth from me? Tuppence met her gaze evenly. I can try. Vane raised the pistol again, but Tuppence grabbed her wrist. They struggled, the weapon clattering to the floor. The chain around Vane's neck snapped. The brass key flew free, spinning across the floor toward the river-facing doors. Both women dove for it. Vane reached first, but Tuppence caught her ankle and pulled. They tumbled, breathless, tangled in coats and fury. The key skittered away again, vanishing into a crack between the floorboards. Vane hissed, You don't understand. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. Of what? Tuppence gasped, pushing her off. Your family's delusion. My mother was no traitor. Tuppence rose, steadying herself against the crate. Then why forge his name? Why silence everyone who might prove it? Vane's lips trembled. For a moment, doubt flickered, fragile, human. Then it hardened again. Because no one else will, she whispered. Behind them came a crash. Tommy had hurled another assailant into a stack of barrels. A final punch, and the man slumped. Tommy looked up, breath ragged. "I think that's all of them." "Not quite," said Tuppence. Vane lunged once more, but Tuppence stepped aside, letting her momentum carry her into the crate stack. The wood gave way. She fell to her knees, coughing as dust billowed. A distant wail split the night, the rising echo of police sirens. Tommy turned toward the sound. "Looks like someone tipped them off." Vane staggered upright. "You've ruined everything," she spat. "You'll see what your country does to its own heroes." Tuppence straightened, voice low. "If you truly believe that, you wouldn't have needed a gun." She stooped quickly, prying up a loose board. The brass key lay beneath, glinting in the lamplight's dying ember. She pocketed it before Vane saw. Tommy caught her hand. Time to vanish. The warehouse door burst open as they slipped through the side entrance. Voices shouted behind them. Constables, startled, confused. The Beresfords darted down the wharf, breath clouding in the chill air. The sirens grew louder, bouncing off the water's surface. They reached the car just as the first police lanterns swept the dock. Tuppence threw one glance back. Mrs. Vane stood silhouetted in the warehouse doorway, arms raised, surrendering or performing. Even from a distance, her poise was unbroken. Tommy started the engine. "She'll tell them whatever suits her, and Bryce will ensure they believe it." "Let him," said Tuppence, clutching the key. "We've got what they wanted to keep hidden." The car sped away, tyres hissing against the wet road. The Thames slipped beside them, silent witness to too many secrets. An hour later, back in their flat, the adrenaline had begun to ebb. Albert, half asleep in the kitchen, blinked as they entered. "You're both alive," he said in astonishment. "I take it that's good news." "Relatively," said Tommy. He tossed his coat onto the chair. There was a welcoming committee, a family confession, and a small war. Tuppence sank onto the sofa, opening her palm. The brass key gleamed faintly in her hand. "And this, Albert, is our souvenir." Albert leaned closer. "What's it open?" "Hopefully," said Tommy, "the end of this entire business." Tuppence turned the key thoughtfully. Mrs. Vane said her mother was framed. But what if that was the lie she was raised to believe? Bryce might have used her, convinced her revenge was justice. "Which makes her dangerous," Tommy said quietly. "Because she believes she's right." She nodded. "All zealots do." The clock chimed midnight, a clear, steady sound. Outside, the city was still awake, engines humming distantly along the river. Tommy poured them each a measure of brandy. "To anonymous allies," he said dryly, "and to the next trap we walk into." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Let's hope it's our own." By the next morning, calm had returned, at least on the surface. Tuppence placed the small brass key on the breakfast table as though it might bite. Albert eyed it warily. "You sure that's not cursed, Mum? Looks like the sort of thing that opens trouble." Tommy smiled faintly. "Close. It opens Charing Cross." Tuppence nodded. "Locker 214, according to the engraving on the stem. Anonymous allies do enjoy their sense of theatre." Albert folded his arms. "Then promise me one thing, sir. You'll at least pretend to act surprised when the ceiling falls in." "We'll do our best," said Tommy. "Keep the home fires burning, Albert, and the phone free for Scotland Yard." Tuppence tucked the key into her glove. "And if we don't return by lunch, sell the furniture and write a tragic memoir." Later that same morning, key and glove, they joined the thinning rush at Charing Cross. 10 minutes after leaving South Audley Mansions, they were there. Charing Cross Station, 9 a.m. rush hour had nearly passed. The air was thick with steam, soot, and the smell of coffee from the platform cafe. Trains exhaled like weary beasts. Tuppence and Tommy walked through the concourse, blending easily with clerks and commuters. No one paid attention to an affable couple in mid-morning coats. That was their advantage. England never suspects its own respectability. Locker 214 sat against a tiled wall near the left luggage office. Unremarkable, dented, a tiny brass plate dulled by time. Tommy produced the key. Moment of truth? Tuppence glanced around. Or moment of arrest? Let's find out which. The key turned smoothly. The door creaked open. Inside lay a manila envelope, thick and tightly bound with string. On its label, Dovecote Archive, restricted, eyes only. Tommy exhaled. After all this chasing, it looks almost innocent. "Innocent things usually are," said Tuppence. She lifted the envelope out with care. Beneath it lay something else, A small photograph in black and white, Mrs. Vane standing beside a grave marked Margaret Vane, 1910 to 1944. Written on the back in fountain pen ink were the words, "Forgive me." Tuppence's expression softened. So she finally knew. Tommy nodded grimly. But forgiveness won't stop Bryce. They found a quiet tea room across from the station. A waitress in a faded apron brought tea and scones, oblivious to the history about to unfold over the tablecloth. Tuppence slit the envelope. Sheets of paper slid free. Official memos, coded reports, and a single stamped header. War Office Directive No. 1193, Misfile Protocol. She skimmed quickly, lips moving. Tommy, listen. This directive authorized the deliberate misfiling of agent identities to deceive enemy intercepts. They assigned false surnames to operatives at risk, including ours. He leaned closer. Meaning? She tapped a paragraph. Agent TB, Thomas Beresford, was listed under alternate identity C. Vane to divert infiltration attempts. Agent M. Vane was filed under T. Beresford to confuse enemy channels. Tommy sat back. Good Lord, our names were switched. And the traitor listed as Beresford, said Tuppence slowly, wasn't you at all. It was Margaret Vane. Her voice trembled between relief and sorrow. She took your name to hide behind it, or perhaps to protect you when Bryce needed a scapegoat. Tommy's jaw set, and Whitehall buried the misfile to avoid scandal. They let her husband and later her daughter carry the disgrace. Tuppence turned another page. There's more. Here, Bryce's signature on the directive. He orchestrated the entire deception. Tommy gave a low whistle. The colonel promoted himself to puppet master. She met his eyes. Then we end this today. With the directive secured and copies pocketed, they headed straight for Whitehall. Later, Whitehall, noon. Colonel Bryce was not a man easily cornered. Yet that afternoon, as he left the Defence Club, he found the Beresfords waiting by the marble steps, neatly dressed, calm, and holding the thin envelope like a loaded weapon. Beresfords, he said coolly, you look uncharacteristically official. Planning to join the civil service? Tuppence smiled. Only as auditors. We've found an accounting error, rather a large one. He eyed the envelope. You should be careful waving stolen files about in public. On the contrary, said Tommy, public is precisely where we prefer you. Pedestrians slowed. A few journalists lingered by the gates. Bryce's face tightened. Tuppence drew a folded sheet from the envelope. Directive No. 1193. Your signature. A misfile protocol that swapped operative names for security and left one woman branded a traitor for 20 years. Bryce's tone was mild, but his hand twitched at his cane. A necessary deception during wartime. You wouldn't understand. Oh, but we do, said Tommy. We spent the war swimming in necessary deceptions. The difference is, ours didn't kill our friends. Bryce's eyes flicked around the street, calculating exits. Whatever you think you've uncovered, it's meaningless without authority. Tuppence handed the sheet to the nearest bystander, a young reporter clutching a notepad. Then let authority read it. The reporter blinked, recognizing the signature at once. Colonel Bryce, is this authentic? Bryce's colour drained. Give that back. The murmur of voices rose, curious, insistent. A photographer lifted his camera. The colonel's composure cracked just enough for Tuppence to see the panic beneath. You ruined Margaret Vane to save yourself, she said softly. You let her husband die in disgrace, her daughter rot in vengeance, and the truth fester in a locked vault. He turned on her sharply. You have no idea what chaos we faced. If her treachery had been public, the morale of every agent in Europe would have collapsed. I contained it. I preserved order. Tommy's voice was cold. By fabricating guilt. Bryce's hand trembled. History requires sacrifice. Tuppence met his gaze steadily. So does conscience. The commotion drew 2 uniformed policemen from the gatehouse. Everything all right, sir? Bryce's mouth opened, then closed again. Pride warred with self-preservation. The cameras clicked. Finally he said, low and rigid, It's true. I authorized the misfile. The woman took blame that wasn't hers, or perhaps was partly hers. It doesn't matter now. It matters to her daughter, said Tuppence, and to every name you buried. Bryce straightened, the soldier reasserting itself. You think you've won something, But the public won't care for nuance. They'll see confusion, not justice. Tommy slipped his arm around Tuppence's. We'll risk it. The Colonel looked past them toward the crowd, the flashing cameras, the gathering storm of whispers. For the first time, he appeared old, not in years, but in exhaustion. His voice dropped to a rasp. I built my career on control. Seems fitting that chaos should write my epitaph. He turned away, gesturing for the constables. I'll give my statement at the yard. And without another word, he walked into the waiting car. The noise faded slowly. The reporters dispersed, clutching their notes like treasure. London resumed its rhythm, omnivorous, forgetful. Tuppence exhaled. It's over. Tommy watched the departing car. Not quite. Nothing's ever over for the dead. They walked along Whitehall, past statues of men who had also believed themselves indispensable. The sun broke briefly through cloud, lighting the pavement in fleeting gold. Tuppence said softly, Do you think she'll forgive us, Mrs. Vane? We exposed her mother. Tommy shook his head. Forgiveness isn't ours to earn, but perhaps she'll finally understand what really happened. She believed all her life that the Beresfords stole her honour, Tuppence murmured. Now she'll learn the Beresfords were her mother's shield. Truth's a cruel comfort, he said, but it's still comfort. By nightfall, the late editions were already out, ink barely dry. That evening, South Audley Mansions. Albert had prepared an impromptu celebration, sandwiches, a bottle of sherry, and the evening edition spread triumphantly on the coffee table. The headline screamed, War hero clears name, Colonel Bryce confesses. Albert grinned. Front page, sir. They're calling you national heroes again. Couldn't happen to nicer people. Tommy winced. We prefer quieter hobbies, Albert. Tuppence poured sherry into 3 glasses, to truth and its inconvenient timing. They clinked glasses. For a moment laughter returned, light, incredulous, human. Then silence settled again, comfortable and thoughtful. Tuppence said quietly, I keep thinking of Margaret Vane. She wasn't innocent, not entirely, but she didn't deserve oblivion. No one does, said Tommy, least of all those who served believing they were saving something noble. He looked toward the fire where the last of the sherry light danced across the mantel clock. You realize, of course, that our names will be footnotes now, part of the same file, forever linked with scandal and salvation. Tuppence smiled faintly. I've always preferred footnotes. They get read by the curious. Albert cleared his throat. What'll you do now, Mum? Now the villains are unmasked and the papers are happy? Laundry, said Tuppence, and perhaps a weekend in Devon. Tommy added, followed by an extended period of pretending we're ordinary people. Albert beamed. I'll put the kettle on for that. Later, when the flat was quiet and the city hummed softly beyond the windows, Tommy found Tuppence by the desk. She was writing a letter, her handwriting slow, deliberate. To Mrs. Vane, he asked. She nodded. I don't expect her to reply, but she deserves to know the truth came from her mother's deception, not ours. He read over her shoulder. Your mother's courage lay not in her loyalty, but in her silence. She bore guilt to protect others. The men who used her are gone now. You are free of their shadow. She signed simply, Tuppence Beresford. Tommy touched her shoulder gently. You're remarkable, you know. I'm tired, she said. That's close enough. They sat together on the sofa, the city lights flickering across the walls. For a long while neither spoke. Then Tuppence said softly, Do you ever think we've spent our whole lives solving riddles other people left behind? Tommy smiled. Yes, but at least we keep finding the answers before breakfast. She laughed quietly. That's something. Outside, a late tram rattled past, echoing down Park Lane. The world was already turning to new concerns, fresh scandals, fresh mysteries. Yet for the Beresfords, a rare peace lingered. Tuppence leaned against him, eyes half closed. Do you know the only thing I want now? What's that? A perfectly ordinary tomorrow. No secret keys, no gunfire, no aliases. Just us, the papers, and toast. Tommy raised his glass of cooling sherry. To ordinary tomorrows, she clinked it gently, and to the names we can finally keep. Some weeks later, with the dust settled and Bryce tucked away from headlines, ordinary mornings had returned for good. The kettle was whistling again, Not the shrill alarm of crisis, but the homely, companionable sound that fills rooms where peace has finally learned the furniture. South Audley Mansions had resumed its old rhythm. The clock ticked on the mantel. A shaft of mid-morning light caught the spine of a well-thumbed volume of detective stories, and Tuppence Beresford, who had stared down more danger than most generals, was sternly folding a newspaper. "Honestly," she said, "you'd think the British press would tire of hero worship. Beresford's exonerated, nation's faith restored, as though we'd been flogged in Trafalgar Square." Tommy looked up from his armchair. "You prefer national scandal resolved?" "I'd prefer silence," she said. "Silence and tea." Albert, hovering in the doorway with a tray, looked relieved. "Then I bring both, ma'am. Strong brew, no scandal." He set the tray down. A faint aroma of toast and bergamot drifted through the air. The tray was perfectly arranged, sugar cubes in their silver bowl, butter pats aligned like soldiers. Tuppence regarded it approvingly. "Albert, you've finally understood the true essence of civilization." "Tea, ma'am?" "Tea," she said solemnly, "and the absence of excitement." Tommy unfolded another section of the paper, scanning idly. "It says here Bryce retired to private medical care in the country. Rather tactful phrasing." "Meaning," said Tuppence, "he's been gently buried alive by his superiors. How very British." Tommy's smile was wry. "Do you feel sorry for him?" "I feel sorry for anyone who builds their life on deception and then believes it will hold." She stirred her cup. "But no, not precisely sorry. Just aware." "Awareness is the luxury of survivors," he said, "and we've become quite practiced at surviving." She raised her cup. "To survival." He clinked his gently against hers. "To understatement." They drank. Outside, London hummed as if nothing had happened. Buses growling, pigeons swaggering, the everyday drum of the city oblivious to the secrets its citizens carried. It was a fine day, the kind of day that might have gone unremarked a month ago. But to the Beresfords, it felt like a small victory. Tuppence leaned back in her chair, letting the sunlight warm her face. "You know, I've decided something terribly radical." Tommy braced himself. "Should I sit up straighter?" "I'm officially banning anonymous letters. From now on, any mystery that doesn't sign its name goes straight into the bin. Even if it contains a treasure map. Especially then. We've quite enough treasure, one flat, one cat that refuses to visit us, and one husband who can make tea without poisoning me." "I see," said Tommy. "So domestic tranquility has won." "For now," she said, smiling. "Don't tempt fate." Albert reappeared, holding an envelope. "Post just arrived, sir. Hand-delivered, special seal." Tuppence groaned theatrically. "There, I jinxed it." Tommy accepted the envelope, frowning. "Government crest, that can't be good." Albert, lingering, said, "I could hide it behind the bread bin, sir. Worked for the gas bill last week." Tuppence laughed. "No, Albert, let's at least see what disaster looks like in embossed stationery." Tommy examined the wax seal. "It's from the ministry, the official kind, not the polite kind." Tuppence looked unimpressed. "They're late. We solved the mystery weeks ago." He broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet on thick paper. He read silently, then raised his brows. "Well," said Tuppence, "it's an official commendation. For services rendered in the preservation of state security, long kept confidential. Signed by the Under-Secretary himself." Albert whistled. "That's posh." Tommy passed it across the table. The parchment gleamed faintly, the ink precise, unemotional. Beneath the signature lay their names, Thomas Beresford and Prudence Beresford. Tuppence looked at it a long time. Then she smiled, not with pride, but with quiet amusement. "Do you know," she said, "I think I won't open it." Tommy blinked. "You just did." "I mean metaphorically. I shall not open it in the moral sense. I shall put it here." She placed it beside the teapot, straightening the corners, "and let it cool like forgotten toast." Albert stared. "But, ma'am, it clears your name proper." "Our name never needed clearing," she said softly. "Only reminding." Tommy's eyes softened. "You're remarkable." "I'm English," she replied. "It's the same thing, really." For a moment, silence. Just the ticking clock and the soft pour of tea refilling their cups. Then Tuppence said, "It's strange, isn't it? A name. During the war we used them like hats. Put one on, take it off, change it when needed. Now suddenly it's sacred." Tommy nodded. "A name's a story, that's all. But people forget stories can be rewritten, especially by those with typewriters and authority." "And by those with tea," she said. He smiled. "Ah, yes, the weapon of civilization." "Exactly." She sipped again. "You can fight lies with documents or with gunfire, but nothing defeats them quite like living well, the quiet sort of victory." "Domestic warfare," Tommy mused. "Strategic calm." "Precisely. The enemy never expects it." Albert began gathering plates, looking sheepish. "If it's all the same, I prefer the quiet victories too. Bit less mopping up after." "You're indispensable, Albert," said Tuppence fondly, "though I still wish you'd stop reading the headlines aloud every morning." "Sorry, Ma'am. Habit. Feels wrong not to know what the papers blame us for." She chuckled. "At least this week it's heroism." Albert straightened. "Then I'll make more sandwiches to celebrate." When he'd gone, Tuppence looked toward Tommy, eyes thoughtful. "You know, somewhere in a dusty office they'll file that commendation under some code we'll never see again." "And misfile it, most likely," he said. "Perhaps under Beresford, Thomas. Domestic nuisance." "Perfect," she said, laughing. "At least history will be accurate for once." They sat quietly, the afternoon sliding into gold. The city's pulse softened, turning domestic. The clink of dishes, the faint hum of conversation from the flat above, the ordinary miracle of peace after turmoil. Tuppence spoke at last, her voice gentle. "Do you ever think about the others? The ones whose names didn't survive the paperwork?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Every day. But perhaps it's enough that we remember them. The world doesn't always reward the right people, but memory can." "Memory," she said. "And tea." He raised his cup. "To both." They drank. A knock interrupted them. The postman again, flustered and apologetic. "Beg pardon, Mrs. Beresford, but this was mixed with your neighbour's letters." He handed over a small envelope with no seal this time, only a neat hand-written address. Tuppence frowned. "Who on earth still uses ink?" She opened it and smiled faintly at the single sentence inside. "Thank you for giving my mother's name back. C.V." She folded it carefully and slipped it between the pages of a book on the shelf. Tommy noticed. "So the daughter writes after all?" "Yes," said Tuppence, "and she signs her name, which is progress." He smiled. "Then I suppose that's the true ending." "No," she said softly, looking toward the teapot still steaming. "This is." Albert returned with fresh cups. "All right then. Who wants another?" Tuppence lifted the pot. "Pour away, Albert. We've a long piece to get through." He grinned. "Music to my ears, ma'am." Tommy leaned back, hands behind his head. "Strange, isn't it? All that intrigue, all those disguises, and the grand finale turns out to be tea at home." "Every good story ends with tea," said Tuppence. "It's the universe's way of saying, 'Calm down, you've survived.'" She looked at the unopened commendation again, then pushed it gently toward the edge of the table. "Let it stay there. Pride fades. Peace pours." Tommy raised his cup once more. "To the name that was never theirs." She met his gaze, smiling. "And to the life that always was." The clock chimed 4. Outside, a milk cart rattled past, and somewhere down the hall a radio played faintly, a cheerful dance tune, bright and ordinary. Inside South Audley Mansions, the Beresfords drank their tea, untroubled at last. The rescued ledger lay sealed in safe custody, the directive copied and archived under its true names at last. No code words, no keys, no shadows, just warmth, and the soft sound of peace being poured into china.